Hi there BookTube, it's Eleanor here, and today I want to talk to you about 3 books that I have been reading that have all sort of stemmed from one another. If you've watched my recent video on Furious Hours by Casey Sepp, which is a look into Harper Lee's sort of last investigation into a true crime story that she was potentially going to write, and she researched it for many years and then it sort of never came to fruition. And that book separates out both the story that she researched, this lawyer that was involved in a couple of the cases that were all sort of intertwined, and then also sort of Harper Lee's background. There's lots of mentions of various different things. One thing I didn't know was that Truman Capote was Harper Lee's next door neighbour growing up, which I thought was very interesting. I'm not sure how I didn't know that, but I didn't. And so from reading that, it then made me want to read more about Harper Lee and Truman Capote. So I picked up Go Set a Watchman because I think it's about time I read that book and put my own 2 pence in about what I think about it, because there's been some mixed reviews, and at the time it came out there was too much hype for me to really sort of settle into it. I wanted to read In Cold Blood because that is brought up in the Harper Lee section of Furious Hours. I also wanted to read Swans, which is by Kelleigh Greenberg-Jephcott, I believe, and that is about Truman Capote and this relationship with these high-powered women. I'll get more onto all of this anyway in a bit. So these are the 3 books that I'm talking about today: Go Set a Watchman, In Cold Blood, and Swan Song. So carry on watching if you want to find out a bit more about my thoughts on these 3 books. Okay, firstly, let's talk about Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee. I really enjoyed this. I already knew that I was going to like Harper Lee's writing style. I loved Kill a Mockingbird. The writing style really draws you in. So I knew that that wasn't going to be an issue for this. I was just a bit worried about the subject because I'd heard some controversial things. And my favourite bit of this whole book is the flashbacks. So I can totally see why the publishers, when they originally got this manuscript, decided that they wanted Harper Lee to concentrate on Scout's childhood, which is mentioned in these flashbacks, and which I think is a really strong draw to get people to read. And I can totally see why they hooked into those, because they were definitely my favourite bits in this book. I felt in part that this didn't feel very much like a novel. It felt more like Harper Lee's sort of manifesto and call to arms and discussion about race. And I think if you put it next to Go Set a Watchman and you read them as one whole story, I think the whole thing makes much more sense. But there were times in this book where I felt like Harper Lee was sort of preaching a little bit too much. There was too many sort of long monologues from various different characters on race, which I felt was a little bit too much sort of tell and shove in your face rather than letting you sort of learn it through the story itself. So let me tell you the basic story. In the story we see Scout coming home. She's coming home for the summer, which she does quite often. She's having this sort of on-off sort of dalliance with this young man who everyone believes that she's eventually going to marry, but she's not so sure. She just enjoys her time with him, and he is working for her father in his law firm. Her father's getting on now. He's got arthritis. He's getting quite old, and while she is at home, she follows her father and this man to a meeting, and it turns out that it's sort of a meeting where a lot of the people there are talking about race, and talking about race in a negative way. And she always thought that her father was there to sort of stand up for the man no matter what the colour of their skin, and it turns out that perhaps he isn't quite as open-minded as she thought. And I think for those people who, when they read To Kill a Mockingbird, were really taken with Atticus, and they really sort of attached this idea of Atticus doing this job, doing this, you know, defending this particular client because of the colour of his skin, I think it will be a sharp jolt for them reading this and realising that perhaps it was more for his sense of justice than anything else, which yeah, also could be seen as, well, he just picks justice above all else. But as the book does talk about race, I feel like that's going to be, some people aren't going to like that. They're going to have seen To Kill a Mockingbird as this ideal portrayal of a man, a small town lawyer who sticks up for the little man, who, you know, sticks up for people, and especially those who are discriminated against, and then they're going to read this one and feel like, oh, they're going to be a little bit let down by his behaviour. But I think what this book does do is it allows Scout to take her father off that pedestal that she's had him on all the time and start to really think about her, what she believes for herself, and rather than sort of putting this man that she always thought was wonderful up on this pedestal, she can now form her own thoughts, her own ideas, and start sort of cutting the apron strings, I suppose, and having that separation and having her own identity. I think it's hard for us when we grow up and we realise that our parents aren't, you know, all perfect, and that they all have, you know, parts of their personality and parts of their beliefs that we don't agree with. And I think it's really difficult to see them as flawed human beings. But I think that's what this book does so really very well, is it shows us Scout discovering that her father perhaps isn't, you know, identical in his thoughts to everything that she believes, and that that's okay, and that it doesn't mean she can't still love him, but she has to allow herself to decide what she believes is right. So this wasn't a 5-star read for me, I think, because of these sort of longer monologue-y preachy parts, but I definitely really enjoyed it, and I would recommend a read, and I gave this one a strong 4 stars. I definitely think it was helped. I listened to it on audio, and it was narrated by the lovely Reese Witherspoon, so I thought that really added to it, because I love Reese Witherspoon's southern accent, and that really brought out sort of the feel of the South for me in this. Okay, so moving on to In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This one is non-fiction. It's the story, or not so story, but it's the true life story of the Clutter family, who lived in a small town, and one night 2 men who didn't know the family at all went into their house and killed the mother, father and the 2 children, or 2 of the Clutter children that were living at home. And this is following Truman's investigation. He goes to the town with Harper Lee, in fact, who acts as his sort of research assistant, and starts looking into the case. He starts talking to people and trying to find out what's gone on, and eventually he becomes very interested in talking to the criminals who end up getting arrested for the job, and finding out their backstory and what has sort of led to this. And I think the saddest part of this is that these 2 men went into the house expecting to find £10,000 of cash in a safe. The information they were given was wrong, and they ended up slaughtering 4 people and only walking away with about £50, which just seems like such a small price. I mean, there's no price to pay on a life, but I mean, it just makes me really sad that something like this could happen, and yeah, it just makes you question everything, doesn't it? But I just thought this book was really interesting, and I really enjoyed finding out about sort of Truman going to this town. And this was very new, like he was really pushing the boundaries of genre here. There wasn't really this sort of there wasn't true crime fiction, and sorry, not fiction, but sort of fictionalized, not even fictionalized, but storied accounts of true life events. So true life crime written in a sort of novel form, so still sticking to the facts, but I think it turns out that maybe there was a little bit of you know, leeway given there, but certainly not, they wouldn't have seen this before. It would have been in journalism, it would have been you know, articles in papers, and not in this sort of long form story. During the start of this, I was really hooked, I was interested, I enjoyed Capote's writing style, but I think for me in the middle here it just started to slow down. We sort of languished in this continual following around of the criminals and where they were and how they were feeling and what they were doing, and I just felt that that bit lasted a little bit too long for me and started to sort of drag a little bit. I think also for me, I would have rather had less of the prisoner's point of view, and I would have rather focused more on the family and the people around the family and what was happening with them. We got an awful lot of information about the criminals, and there did seem to be this sense that Truman really felt for them, and I can see that what he was trying to make was some sort of commentary about, you know, that you're a product of how you're brought up, and that mental health issues can cause you know, people to do things, and this sort of look at the system in that way. And the men were eventually hanged, and I think that had quite a profound effect on him. But I just, yeah, I wish that there had been slightly less on them and more on the case itself and the family and maybe the lead investigator, I don't know. But it was good, and I'm really pleased that I finally read it, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then the final book I want to talk to you about is Swans Song by Kelleigh Greenberg-Jephcott. This is a bit shiny because it's a library copy, so I'm going to put it down in a minute because it's quite heavy, but I'll hold it as long as I can. This is about Truman Capote again, but it's talking about his relationship with these women that he calls his swans. And it was later in his life, well, actually from the time he sort of became famous for his writing, he surrounded himself with these high-profile, powerful women, including people like the Roosevelts and the Churchills and the Kennedys, and he had long lunches, he went on trips with them, and they confided in him, they told him their secrets, they told him things about their life, they gossiped with him, and he then took what he had learnt, that gossip, their sordid secrets, and he exposed them in Esquire articles, and it had a profound effect on these women, and they trusted him and they felt extremely betrayed. And we look in this book at both his relationships and how they formed, and the relationships before and after when he started releasing these articles, but then also we look at the stories which were actually discussed in the articles, so what he actually exposed, these particular incidents that caused so much controversy. I mean, in many ways this book is amazing. It's really well written, it's really salacious in terms of what Truman Capote did. I mean, it's very interesting. Again, he pushes the boundaries of genre and pushes the boundaries of, you know, friendship really, and that in itself is really interesting. It's obviously extremely well researched, but I think the problem for me, and it's not really the author's fault unfortunately, is that I really didn't like anyone. I didn't like Truman Capote, I didn't like any of the women. I thought they were all sycophantic, shallow, just not very nice human beings really. I just felt like they were not very nice at all, and so I struggled to really root for anyone or feel sorry for anyone. I think the other thing for me is that it did take quite a long while, and I'm talking a good 100 pages or so, for me to really work out where we were flitting to, what the chapter headings meant, how it was all laid out, because it just sort of flits back and forth. And although we're given in the chapters, you know, give it a dues, we're given in the chapters the dates that are being covered and various different things, I really struggled to get my mind going with that. And I think maybe slightly clearer, I don't know, maybe if it said, you know, the article, or maybe if it had included I don't know, I just felt a bit lost at times, and it took me a while to get into sort of the pace and the rhythm of the book, which I really don't like to take that long, and that sort of I struggled with that a little bit. So I really enjoyed it though, and I think as part of a whole sort of reading experience, reading all 3 of these books, I enjoyed it, and I would give it 3, maybe 4 stars. No, 3 stars. If I was pushing it at 3.5, but 3 stars. So although I had 1 4-star here and 2 3-stars, that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the whole experience. And actually the experience as a whole, and my sort of understanding now a bit more about Harper Lee's life and Truman Capote's life and things that have happened there, and I've recently gone on and watched this film of Truman Capote, has been a wonderful experience. And in an experience wise, I would give it 5 stars, but the books themselves I gave 4, 3 and 3. Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and it's definitely something that I would like to go down the rabbit hole of again. And I think part of what I enjoyed is it's not going down the rabbit hole of reading all the books by one author. It's not the idea of reading necessarily all books about the same thing. It's just sort of a loosely based theme, and I've really enjoyed it. So yeah. Let me know your thoughts on these books, and if you enjoyed this video, give me a little thumbs up so that I know that you've enjoyed it, and maybe I'll look at doing something like this again. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now, BookTube.